Live from Washington, D.C., this is Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu and Kailey Leinz.
Iran says the mediators are now stepping in. Welcome to the Monday edition as Qatar and Pakistan try to lower the temperature after a weekend of intense fighting that saw the deaths of at least 3 Americans. I'm Joe Mathieu alongside Kailey Leinz in Washington. Kailey, there's talk now of a new 10-day ceasefire on the table, but it's certainly not in place yet.
No, and we haven't heard from President Trump about that prospect. In fact, what he most recently warned about on Truce Social is that Iran will pay for the deaths of those service members you mentioned many times over. Not necessarily rhetoric that looks like it's trying to cool down the temperature. Interestingly, though, oil not seeming to reflect too much more of a geopolitical risk premium, even as the Houthis say they are going to shut down the Red Sea to Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, it's amazing to actually see lower oil prices in the face of these headlines. But gas keeps creeping higher. We're at $4 a gallon for a national average, said to be the threshold that is obviously not good news for this administration or Republicans running in the midterm cycle. Kailey, we've also got breaking news today as we explore the news from the Middle East. The Paramount-Warner Brothers deal has been temporarily paused by a federal judge. That was a redhead on the terminal just a minute ago.
Yeah, and it's affecting the stock. Paramount and Warner Brothers are both lower. Warner Brothers down about 2% right now, and we'll have a further check on those prices with Charlie Pellet in just a moment. But I would remind our audience, we just spoke with the Attorney General of California, Rob Bonta, last week, who led a coalition of a dozen attorneys general in filing this lawsuit, looking for this temporary injunction to delay effectively the closing of this merger so that they could carry on their antitrust lawsuits in the courts.
Yeah, so the grind continues. We'll be following all the affected stocks throughout the day with what is a brand new story here. And we'll have analysis coming up from our political panel. Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino are with us. And looking ahead to an important conversation later on this hour as the president of the United Nations General Assembly sits down with Bloomberg. Our own Romaine Bostick will be holding forth in a little bit.
Yep, looking forward to that conversation with Annalena Baerbock, just like I'm looking forward to this market check from Charlie Pellet up in New York. Charlie, we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much indeed. Let us recap and reset. You guys brought us the headline. It bears repeating. Paramount-Warner Brothers deal has temporarily been paused by a federal judge. The deal put on hold for 14 days. You recall states were suing to block the deal. They allege this transaction would harm competition for film and cable TV distribution. They're asking for a temporary restraining order to block the merger for at least 28 days. Today, the judge said 14. Shares of both companies are trading lower right now. Paramount Skydance down by 1%. Warner Brothers Discovery is moving lower as well, down 0.7%. But again, the headline breaking moments ago, the Paramount-Warner Brothers deal temporarily paused by a federal judge. We'll bring you more details as they become available. Right now, we do have U.S. equities trading higher with the S&P up 14. That is a gain of 0.2%. Stocks are getting a lift from chip makers. The oil rally is continuing now. WTI, Brent, both advancing. The Dow Jones Industrial Average, however, trading lower by 168 points, down 0.3%. To be sure, S&P up 0.2, NASDAQ up 0.5%, and the Bloomberg Mag 7 index up now by 0.2%. The stocks, the Philadelphia Stock Exchange Semiconductor Index, trading higher by 1.7%, a 10-year at 4.60%. Gold, little change, $4,011 the ounce, down $5, down 0.1%. And crude has been bouncing around, back in the green right now. WTI 82.57 a barrel, up by 0.1%. Again, repeating our top story. Moments ago, we learned that the Paramount-Warner Brothers deal has temporarily been paused by a federal judge. Shares of both companies are lower, 1% drop right now for both Paramount Skydance and Warner Brothers Discovery. Stay with Bloomberg for the latest on this developing story. I'm Charlie Pellet in New York. Kailey and Joe, back to you now in Washington.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. As Charlie mentioned, it is a temporary pause for that Paramount-Warner Brothers Discovery deal. The judge in that case has set a hearing on a longer block of that deal for August 3rd, 2 weeks from today. And of course, that's a story we'll continue to follow for you here on Balance of Power and on Bloomberg TV and radio. Just as we continue to follow the updates from the Middle East, as we mentioned at the top of the hour, we saw deaths of at least 3 more American service members in Jordan and Iraq yesterday. In Jordan, of course, the 2 died due to an Iranian attack on U.S. military facilities. There in Iraq, it was a service member who was trying to disarm a downed Iranian drone. So we have more service members who have died, at least 17 now, as a result of this conflict. And Trump, the president, as we mentioned, is suggesting Iran will pay for that many times over, even as he signals that he still wants to pursue the ambition here, which is a non-nuclear Iran. This is how the president framed things yesterday.
We hit him very hard again tonight. This is a far bigger job that we're doing. We were doing a little job of stopping them from having a certain capability. Now we're just ending it. So it's really not the same thing. What we're doing now is we're ending any chance where they could have a nuclear missile.
But of course, they continue to fire ballistic missiles, conventional weaponry, and we also know that the Houthi rebels, which of course take direction from Iran, are now threatening a blockade of Saudi Arabia. That's why we've seen crude oil tip higher. We were actually lower a short time ago, and futures are pointing to higher prices with gas, not just gasoline, but diesel as well, pointing higher. We want to spend some time with Tyler Kendall, getting the latest on all of the headlines that have been moving from Iran, and our political panel is standing by as well with their take on things. Tyler, thanks for coming over to spend some time with us here. This is a tough spot, and the president does not seem to be climbing down from some of the harsh rhetoric, saying that he's now directing Pete Hegseth and what he calls his Department of War to make up for the deaths of these at least 3 American service members. So the prospect of a 10-day ceasefire seems like it might not be here yet.
Right. At the moment, it appears that we are pointed toward escalation, which is really what this weekend marked. Serious escalation, as you're both outlining. The total U.S. death toll now reaching 17 service members since the conflict started back in February. And we're seeing it escalate on both sides. As you mentioned, Joe, we now have this reporting that the Iranian-backed militia group, the Houthis, are looking towards a maritime blockade of Saudi Arabia. We can't only look at that through the U.S.-Iran war lens. We do know that this is also part of a ceasefire between Saudi Arabia and the Houthis from 2022 breaking down. But obviously, Iran has been backing the Houthis. They told them last week to be prepared if the U.S. hits energy infrastructure, that they should be ready to totally close down transit when it comes to that other oil route through the Red Sea. So it feels like both sides are now ratcheting up the pressure, even as we got indications and signals from both sides that maybe they would be open toward diplomacy. Secretary of State Marco Rubio saying that the U.S. got strong indications from Iran, but then this statement from Iranian Foreign Ministry earlier today saying on one hand there was diplomatic activity in the diplomatic apparatus was the word they used, but also that they have sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz and that's not going to go anywhere.
Which, of course, is a major problem for the United States, but it's also a problem politically for the president that gasoline prices are on the march higher, once again north of $4 a gallon on average across the country. Are there any levers that the president can pull short of saying something positive on Truce Social to try and talk the markets down here? Do we have more wiggle room in the SPR, Tyler?
We were talking about this last hour on Balance of Power. There are a few different levers that we know the administration has already been thinking about, including our Bloomberg News reporting from last week that we could see an extension of that Jones Act shipping waiver, which essentially tries to make it cheaper and easier to move crude oil around this country. President Trump has previously threatened investigations into big oil companies. Lowering gas prices quickly gets really tricky because we know that it takes so much time to move the refined product through the supply chain. And we have to keep in mind that a lot of gas stations are independent and they have to factor in their own margins when they buy during a supply shock, and it may be harder to bring those prices down that we pay at the pump more quickly. But $4 a gallon is really that political threshold that we talk about a lot. So we'll see what the administration says from here.
Pretty interesting to consider. We're just hearing, by the way, from White House Press Secretary, the president will attend the dignified transfer tomorrow evening at Dover Air Force Base, and we are still waiting for confirmation on what could be a 4th American death. As the president says, this is a very sad situation, but also one that will be avenged. Tyler, with all of this in mind, what does the president have going on today? Is he doing anything public facing? I see a lot of closed events on his schedule. After the primetime address to the nation last week, you'd think that we might hear from him.
Right. We'll have to see if any of these events open up, but I don't believe anything is public right now on the schedule, at least at this point. He has been posting on Truth Social, as you mentioned, this renewed threat that we got within the last hour, also commenting on other priorities, including when it comes to the potential reconciliation package that may or may not be getting through the House this week. But of course, that includes, in some regard, funding for the Pentagon related to the conflict in Iran. We have seen now 9 consecutive days of strikes, and CENTCOM has been giving us updates. I believe the update today was 7 ships so far have been turned around and redirected amid the naval blockade in the Strait of Hormuz. Feels like our eyes have been more trained toward the Pentagon's updates at this point than President Trump's.
Well, and of course, we'll hear from the Pentagon tomorrow as the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, and Joint Chiefs Staff Chair Dan Kane will be testifying before the Senate Appropriations Committee as they ask for more money from Congress. Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall, our Washington correspondent, thank you so much. And just to reiterate the news that Joe mentioned a moment ago, the White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt did confirm that the president will be attending the dignified transfer of these 3 dead American service members tomorrow at Dover Air Force Base. And it's on that note we turn now to our political panel. Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino, Bloomberg Politics contributors, are with us. Rick, of course, Republican strategist and Stonecourt Capital partner. Jeanne, a Democratic analyst and democracy visiting fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Ash Center. Rick, unfortunately, this is not the first dignified transfer that the president has had to attend since Operation Epic Fury began. And I wonder if you see his options here as either one in which he has to back down or one where he has to inherently escalate and therefore risk more American service members' lives.
Yeah, look, there's always an option on the table just to walk away. The president has even mentioned that through the course of this, 5.5-month conflict. But nobody really takes that seriously. The reality here is the rest of these options are very limited for him, and that's to do what he's doing, which continue to escalate in order to de-escalate at some point in time. And of course, that goes up and down every day. Or to really maximize pressure, which means probably putting boots on the ground, which is another horrible option for the president, but one that has to be considered and has been. And the reality, though, is expect more dignified transfers when you start putting troops in harm's way on the ground in Iran. So it's a difficult situation, and I think the Iranians are taking full advantage of that. They know that by putting pressure on Donald Trump's base, by having higher gas prices, by putting people in harm's way, by killing U.S. service members, by harassing our allies in the region, that all of that is a weight that they think will crush Trump's resolve and get a deal that is advantage to them. And I think that's the biggest fear everyone in the region has, is we're just not playing in Donald Trump's verse with too many good cards in this deck right now.
Well, the mediators are raising their hands, Jeanne, according to Iran, with a 10-day ceasefire apparently on the table here. A proposal realizing that the MOU didn't last very long here. But Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, was also speaking in terms of the potential for diplomacy following a very violent weekend. Here's what he said.
The only reason why the U.S. is conducting strikes is against assets of Iran that are being used to attack global commercial shipping. The Straits of Hormuz are international waterway, and they continue to launch against ships in that international waterway. Other countries should join us in this effort.
So Qatar and Pakistan, who are the main intermediaries here, see a return to U.S.-Iran positions pre-July 9 as a first step, according to the official Iranian Students News Agency, Jeanne. Fighting over control of the strait began that day. Is there any way to turn the clock back at this point?
You can't turn it back. Hopefully the 10-day ceasefire is something that can be implemented, although the concern there is, of course, you give the Iranians time to build some of their weaponry. And that's what we've seen when we've had pauses in the past. And this is something that the president, when he was speaking last night, he continues to say that Iran is badly damaged. They've lost everything militarily. He says it over and over again. And yet, if that's the case, how does Iran still have the capacity to fight the greatest military in the world? How can they still be lashing out at our Gulf allies? How can they still be killing service members, two of whom were identified as a young 25-year-old man from Hawaii and a 19-year-old service member from Texas, and the other one, I didn't see the identification on that, and potentially a fourth. This is the big question, though, everybody is asking. When public opinion polls, the Washington Post last week, 69% of Americans say this war is being badly managed by the president, badly handled. Why does he continue to say that their abilities have been decimated if, in fact, they keep hitting us to the point where this thing is escalated and we're losing service members? The messaging on this has been problematic from the start, and this is where he is losing the American public, in addition to the increasing price of gas and oil and everything else.
I just want to mention, Rick and Jeanne, some breaking news that's just crossing the Bloomberg terminal. We, of course, have a new prime minister in the UK, and Andy Burnham, and he's starting to assemble his cabinet after the resignation of the old Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves. We now have named a new UK Chancellor. John Healey has been picked by Prime Minister Burnham to be the next Chancellor of the Exchequer. This, of course, follows Joe Burnham's remarks when he took the position, talking about how he's going to be looking for more fiscal flexibility where it is available, spooked the bond market a little bit with gilt yields going higher, and it's going to be a question of to what extent John Healey is looking to execute that kind of flexibility, what kind of decisions he would like to make, as he is going to be the next Chancellor of the Exchequer in the UK. Yeah,
pretty interesting development here, having spent time in a number of different positions after Keir Starmer's election, was appointed Shadow Defense Secretary. He's kept very strong relations with leaders here in the U.S., including folks from both the Trump and Biden administrations, and is said to be pretty close with Pete Hegseth. So this is an interesting development, and one that will be followed up by more as he tries to build the cabinet here.
Yep, and we'll have more on this throughout the day for you here on Bloomberg TV and radio. But Joe, you mentioned Pete Hegseth, and that's what I wanted to ask you about, Rick, is the defense secretary will be testifying in the Senate tomorrow before the Appropriations Committee as he tries to make the case for the supplemental funding the Pentagon has requested, of course, a $1.5 trillion defense budget. How much more difficult is his job tomorrow, knowing we have more service members who have just died in the Middle East?
Yeah, it'll certainly make it a more somber occasion in the Senate, and it'll be a difficult task to convince the senators that the money is being well spent, in the sense that we're not winning. And there's nothing like a politician sitting there listening to a defense secretary, and the first thing they want to know is, are we winning? It's going to be hard to answer that question with any credibility at this stage. And in a process, we're exhausting quite a bit of equipment and man time that is not going to be easily replaceable. So I expect it's going to be a difficult time with Secretary Hegseth and Joint Chief Chairman Kaine, and I think it'll add to the confusion that already exists between a massive budget request, as you point out, Kailey, for $1.5 trillion for the Defense Department, and a generous amount of money in the Reconciliation 3.0 to support the war. It's a lot of money flying around, and nobody's really got their hands on it.
It's a lot of money flying around, and I wonder, Jeanne, what will be Democrats' posture tomorrow? I think it's fairly predictable, but you know that Pete Hegseth is showing up with his own Oppo research and actually enjoys the fight with lawmakers who are criticizing him. Does that change the way Democrats manage their time?
I don't think so. And it is just reprehensible, because we are talking about servicemen and women. We are talking about a military engagement and a war of choice that was badly managed, badly thought out, badly conceived from the start. And he's going to show up, and I'm sure you're right, with a log of Oppo research he could try to use against any member of Congress. That is reprehensible. We are not in a good position vis-a-vis Iran. What he should be talking about is what we can do to turn this thing around. What is the strategy this administration is going to utilize to do that? And throwing $1.5 trillion at it is not the answer. And so I think we're going to hear Democrats press him on what this is needed for and what is the strategy, not to mention the fact that they have not come to Congress to vote on the war. And that is something that they have experienced as a real, I think, lost moment to have a conversation with the people in the United States about what we're even doing there.
Great conversation with our panel today. Bloomberg Politics contributors Jeanne, Zaino, and Rick Davis. Thank you both so much for the insights, and we'll let you know as more news develops with the war with Iran. We get back to another and unrelated breaking news headline that popped shortly after we came to air with the Paramount-Warner Brothers deal now suddenly on ice after a federal judge temporarily paused Paramount Skydance's $110 billion takeover of Warner Brothers Discovery. We've got some time right now with Bloomberg's Chris Palmieri, who's joining us, our senior editor, entertainment team leader, with us live from World Headquarters in New York. Chris, thanks for jumping on here. The judge has scheduled an August 3rd hearing. What will happen that day?
I believe it's a consideration of a more long-standing injunction on the merger. This was a temporary one. And then perhaps then setting a date for trial, which is Paramount's going to want to move as quickly as possible. Just to put this into context here, this deal's already been approved by the Justice Department. It's widely expected to get the blessing of regulators in Europe this week. So they were poised to close this, as soon as Thursday. And this puts all of that on hold. And just to really further amp up the pressure, if this deal doesn't close by the end of September, Paramount has to pay Warner Brothers shareholders potentially hundreds of millions of dollars a quarter in essentially late fees. So there's a lot riding on this court case.
Well, certainly so. And when we talk about the states had requested this injunction, yes, but their wider case that this deal is going to be harmful to competition, Chris, do we have a sense of whether or not that is likely to hold up in court on the merits?
Well, I think when this case was first filed, there was a bit of a relief among investors that it wasn't a stronger case. The state's attorney general decided to pick on just sort of a couple slivers of the potential market. The market share of the combined movie studios, and in particular the blockbuster films. It's a very unusual approach. There's so much consolidation in this deal, if you think about it. Merging two giant streaming services, Paramount Plus and HBO Max, merging CNN and CBS News, and consolidation in the news business. And so there was definitely a feeling that this wasn't as bad a case, for Paramount as it could have been.
Would all of this pushback from the attorneys general and other critics of the deal have taken place if Netflix had won?
Yes. There was an active group of people, including Paramount itself, arguing that Netflix was also a very anti-competitive deal. In that case, obviously, huge consolidation of the streaming businesses of Netflix and HBO Max and that. So, yeah, I think this would have been a hot potato no matter who bought it.
Either way.
All right. Well, the effort for Paramount Skydance to buy Warner Brothers Discovery right now, at least, is on pause, according to this judge. Bloomberg's Chris Palmieri, thank you so much for hopping on as we deal with the breaking news that is having a market impact. Warner Brothers Discovery shares right now down about 1.5%. So let's get a check on that. Everything else that's moving in the markets now as we turn back to Charlie Pellet up in New York. Hey, Charlie.
Hi, thank you very much. Let's recap and reset. If you're just joining us, a federal judge has temporarily paused Paramount Skydance's $100 billion takeover of Warner Brothers Discovery. WBD trading lower by 1.4%. Paramount Skydance down now by 1.3%. Joe mentioned Netflix. Netflix shares down now by 1.7%. Out of the United Kingdom, just getting word that John Healey has been named UK Chancellor of the Exchequer. That word from Downing Street. U.S. stocks right now, we're looking at a Dow that is lower by 200 points, down 0.4%. S&P up 0.2%. NASDAQ Composite Index higher by 0.5%. 0.2%. We're seeing oil bouncing around. West Texas Intermediate crude flat on the day right now, 82.51 a barrel. Brent 88.48, up by 0.4%. But the big market story today, the surge in semiconductors. Right now, the SOX rebounding by 1.9%, a 10-year 4.59%. Spot gold 0.1% lower at $4,000.11 on spot gold. And again, crude bears repeating, up now by 0.2%. Recapping, S&P up 0.1%. I'm Charlie Pellet. Joe and Kailey, that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. Tracking the latest in the markets, we're tracking the latest from President Trump, who said on Truce Social earlier this hour that Benjamin Netanyahu will not be arrested in any shape or form while in the United States of America. This, of course, follows the New York City Mayor Zohar Mamdani floating the idea that New York's legal department is looking into the notion of arresting Prime Minister Netanyahu when he's in New York for the United Nations General Assembly in September. It underscores, obviously, the political sensitivity around the issue of Israel and the war in Iran here at home. But it is one that, of course, is going to be front and center when the United Nations gathers in just a couple months, of course. And I'm pleased to say that joining us now for an important conversation with Bloomberg's very own Romain Bostic is the president of the United Nations General Assembly, Annalena Baerbock. And we'll hand it over to Romain now, live in New York. Romain.
Thank you very much, Kailey. I am here with Annalena Baerbock, of course, the president of the 80th session of the UN General Assembly. As we speak right now, this week, we are expected to start to get those straw polls to potentially select the next Secretary General of the United Nations. Do we have any sense about the 6 candidates and what you, as president, would like to see in terms of what their priorities should be over the next 5 years?
The next Secretary General will not only be the face of this unique multilateral institution, but it will also decide on whether the UN will play a relevant role on peace and security, but also on embracing the chances we have in an interconnected world about global governance structure, on AI, for example, on lifting millions out of poverty. And as you said, currently there are 6 candidates, 4 women, 2 men. So far, there has never been a female Secretary General in 80-year history of the United Nations. So it's really a decisive moment and an important decision also by member states to decide which person represents 8 billion people best in these challenging global times.
Well, let's talk about those 8 billion people. Prior to the 2015-2016 campaign, this was a relatively opaque process, the selection process. That opened up a little bit about 10 years ago. And under your leadership as president of the 80th Assembly, you have tried to make things a bit more transparent, having the candidates come out and give these interviews well in advance of the actual selection process. Are those people, the 8 billion people out there, do they actually have a say in this to some degree or another?
They are represented by their member states, by their governments, by their ambassadors here in New York. However, we also know that in the modern times, power lies also in communication around the world. So if there's now the saying out there, for example, that 2 years ago, member states agreed by consensus that it should be this time really female candidates, because otherwise those 8 billion people, or at least 4 billion, half of women and girls, would question if an institution built on human rights, on equality, was not capable of finding a woman again. This will have a total different debate than it had 10 years ago when we didn't really have the power of social media. So now, as we're having this town hall meeting on Thursday coming up, live streamed by Bloomberg, we will have the chance also that people hear about what's going on, because frankly speaking, most of the people probably don't know that the Secretary General process is ongoing. But this will be also a power game, frankly speaking, between the Security Council, upon which recommendation a person will be nominated. But in the end, it is the 193 member states in the General Assembly representing 8 billion who take the final decision.
But those 5 permanent members of the Security Council, which includes the U.S., obviously, as well as Russia, China, France, and the U.K., they do have an inordinate amount of power to be able to say, this is the person that we want. If they put someone on your desk who maybe you do not think is appropriate, what options would you have to push back on that?
In these challenging times, in my personal view, it's always how you define power. Obviously, being a member of the Security Council, a P5 member, you would say, well, it's up on us to recommend somebody. Yet, if you define power, that in the end, the General Assembly has to agree, and if the General Assembly, so the member states, make very clear, it is hard for us, for example, to vote on a person who is denying climate change. If we just had a couple of weeks ago a joint resolution in the General Assembly about the member states' responsibility of fighting climate crisis, because it's one of the key drivers for more conflicts and crises around the world, so it's a peace and security issue, then power shifts. Because if there would be a proposal, for example, where a person would face a situation that he or she is not sure whether she will make the majority in the General Assembly, then obviously everything changes. And this is unique about this process, because as you mentioned, before it was behind closed doors, there was no television reporting about it, there was no social media asking questions, so where does a person stand on peace and security or women's rights, for example. But we have had also in the history a situation that, for example, when Kofi Annan was finally elected, the African states made very clear, because it was their turn, if this is not an African person being proposed, we don't even take a vote on, back then it was him.
Yes.
Yeah. So this time it could be also very clear that member states are saying, we agreed 2 years ago that we should nominate women. How would we explain back to our constituency afterwards we could not find a woman? You cannot say, well, there was no competent woman out there in the world if you have 4 billion candidates. Right. So this is also a question about the credibility of the General Assembly. So also a signal to the Security Council, if they could propose only a man, or if they would decide then, okay, we propose a man and a woman, which never happened before, that there were 2 persons.
I am curious, though. I mean, some of the members of the Permanent Security Council are also some of the biggest ones that are in arrears to the United Nations. You've had to cut the budget. You've had to adjust. The United States is at least several billion behind. China, last time I checked, had not made its payments for the year. Is there a sense here that this is a permanent cycle where we are going to see nations either not pay what they are obligated to, or to delay those payments?
We are in a very critical moment, and this is why the current Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, has rang the alarm bell that we will face a liquidity crisis. Again, my philosophy is, in every crisis is a chance. Because when we faced this situation that we could not pay for peacekeeping at all anymore, beginning of July, member states came together. I invited all of them and said, we have to change our financial rules. For example, we had this very, frankly speaking, ridiculous rule that you have to pay back money which was never collected in the first place if you did not spend it. So if the US didn't pay, obviously the US could not, the UN could not spend it, and we changed this rule. So we see at the moment that under pressure, the vast majority of member states understands that the UN is the life insurance for most of the countries in the world, and under pressure we can reform. But this will be the key new task for the next Secretary General, to drive forward this reform, but also make clear to member states, especially the big P5, if you do not pay, you could even lose your voting right in the General Assembly.
But some of the reform measures that have been in place right now have, I don't know, either intentionally or unintentionally been conflated with austerity.
Yes.
Is this an austerity move by your part and the parts of the other leaders, or is this sort of a temporary pullback, adjusting the finances until you get the other countries to pay up and pay on time?
Neither. This is about leadership and taking up the responsibility by those who believe that we need the United Nations. And I always say, no single day would the world be better off without this United Nations, besides all the shortcomings. Because we just spoke, you came here by plane. You would not enter a plane if there would not be the UN, because it's also responsible for safety and aviation. We would not be possible to fly around the world if it would not be the World Health Organization having fought with member states on fighting COVID together. So at a moment where, as you said, there are certain actors who would really like to destroy this organization. It's a self-interest that we reform it because it was built 80 years ago. And some of the mechanisms obviously do not work like 1947. So we have to change this. For example, the issue, how many resolutions do we have? We have more than 40,000 mandates yearly in the UN. We have 27,000 meetings. So this part of the reform, which I'm driving forward together with the Secretary General, this is what we need to protect the United Nations. On the other hand, we should not allow cynics to weaponize this unique reform which we need to destroy the house from inside out. And this is why, for me, in the reform, it's so important to make clear that the UN was founded always on 3 pillars: peace and security, sustainable development, and human rights. And to those who argue now we should do less on sustainable development because this would be saving money, I would always say, well, this is not the foundation of the United Nations, because the founders knew after the Second World War, without sustainable development, you will just enter the next war and crisis.
Madam President, really appreciate you being here. We have to leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Joe and Kailey, back to you.
All right, our thanks to Romaine Bostick, joined by Annalena Baerbock. And of course, you can, on Thursday, July 23rd, catch Romaine as he moderates an event specially put on and produced and broadcast by Bloomberg Television at 5 p.m. Wall Street time. All of those candidates that they were just discussing to be the next UN Secretary of General will be gathering in the UN General Assembly Hall for a live debate that will be moderated by Romaine. Again, that's Thursday, July 23rd, and we're very much looking forward to that. But Joe, of course, we still have more coming up on this Monday. In just a few minutes, we're going to be joined by Republican Congressman Mike Flood of Nebraska, as he and his colleagues in the House have a pretty long to-do list and not a lot of days to get it done with recess approaching.
I think 4 is the real number there. It's crunch time on Capitol Hill. Once again, here we are as lawmakers get back to it today. To Kailey's point, we're going to spend some time with Congressman Mike Flood, the Republican from Nebraska, will be with us. This is the voice of the Main Street Republican Caucus, and it'll be fascinating to hear what he has to say about reconciliation and some of the other agenda items that we've been talking about. Megan Scully from our Congress team will join us, too. It's all ahead right here on Balance of Power, only on Bloomberg.
It's 1:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. A federal judge in Oakland has temporarily paused Paramount Skydance's $110 billion takeover of Warner Brothers Discovery. The judge today ordered the companies to hold off on consummating their deal for 14 days. Paramount and Warner Brothers had hoped to close this deal as soon as July 22nd. California and 11 other states did sue to block the Hollywood mega merger on July 13th. Warner Brothers Discovery shares, they're down by 2.5%. Paramount Skydance right now trading lower by 0.9%. We are looking at an update barely now for the S&P 500 index. So right now the S&P is up 6. That is a gain of under 0.1%. The Dow lower by 235 points. On the industrials, down 0.4%. Both NASDAQ and the NASDAQ 100 index are gaining. The NASDAQ 100 index up now by 0.6%. NASDAQ Composite Index up 0.4%. This with the SOX pushing higher by 1.6%. 10-year at 4.59% with a 2-year 4.22%. Spot gold down 0.2%. 4,010 the ounce on spot gold, while crude bouncing around. WTI up 0.4%. 82.85 a barrel on WTI. Iron shares are surging after the data center operator raised its year-end AI cloud annualized run rate revenue target to more than $4 billion. That's up from $3.7 billion, following the signing of $2.8 billion in new multi-year contracts. Iron shares, they're surging by 20%. And Alphabet's Google is developing a server chip designed to optimize its Gemini AI model. That's according to the information citing sources. Alphabet, which reports earnings on Wednesday, up by 1.9%. Recapping, S&P up by 0.1%. Balance of Power continues now. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your hosts, Joe Mathieu and Kailey Leinz.
All right, Charlie Pellet Tracking the markets, thank you so much. I'm Kailey Leinz alongside Joe Mathieu here in Washington. This is Balance of Power, where, of course, we follow the balance of power here in the U.S., but around the world as well. And the balance of power is changing in the U.K., or at least those in power are changing. It's still the same Labour Party at the top of the U.K. government, but now a new Prime Minister in Andy Burnham, a new Chancellor of the Exchequer in John Healey, which was announced earlier this hour, and now a new Foreign Secretary has just been named. Ed Miliband, Joe, will be serving in that role in this new cabinet. And of course, he will be charged with liaising with the likes of Marco Rubio, one would imagine, but European governments as well, as we just had headlines crossing that the new Prime Minister, Andy Burnham, also has spoken with the EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen this afternoon and has invited the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to the UK at the earliest opportunity.
Spoke with President Trump today as well and invited him to Manchester. We'll see if that happens. And if so, which jet the president's going to be taking as the gifted 747 for Qatar goes in for enhancements, as he says.
It's going to be
maxed out. And we'll see if they can get that done in the better part of a month with more air defenses to be added to the new jet. We've got our eyes on Capitol Hill here at home. Of course, Kailey, with only 4 legislative days until the August recess and a boatload of work to do, beginning with Reconciliation 3.0. And that's where we start our conversation with Megan Scully. Before we hear from Congressman Mike Flood, he's going to be in our studio in just a moment. Megan leads our Capital Influence team here at Bloomberg in Washington. I don't know, Megan, I mean, I could read the list. NDAA, a CR that the Speaker has ready to roll here to avoid a government shutdown, the supplemental by way of reconciliation. House Rules Committee is going to get underway here in about 15 minutes. Will that lead to anything actually getting passed before everyone goes away?
It's going to be a busy week, certainly, in the House. And, you know, they are motivated to get a lot of this done before leaving for 5 or 6 weeks for the August recess, which is basically sort of a crucial final sprint before the midterm elections in November. You know, I think of all the things that are likely to get done, there does seem to be bipartisan consensus around a continuing resolution, one of these stopgap spending measures that would essentially avert a government shutdown when the fiscal year ends on September 30th and keep the government open until about a month after the midterm elections. No party benefits from having a shutdown right before an election, so there does seem to be consensus there. There are other areas, though, that are going to be trickier. The defense authorization bill, of course, that usually gets bipartisan support. But due to efforts to attach voter identification legislation to that, that is becoming certainly a flashpoint. So now Republican leaders are trying to attract fiscal conservatives and others hardliners within the GOP to support that bill by attaching extraneous measures, assuming that Democrats will vote en masse against it. There are other issues, including a stock trading ban that used to be a bipartisan effort and is now it appears that it's mostly a Republican or perhaps a Republican-only measure, due once again to efforts to attach voter ID legislation to that, as well as concerns among Democrats that the new legislation does not have enough teeth for actual enforcement.
Well, and on this voter ID idea, Megan, we did hear from President Trump about this on Truce Social today. He thanked a number of members of the House, including the Speaker, for launching an effort to get as much of the Save America Act as possible in a budget bill. He goes on to mention different components: voter photo ID, proof of citizenship, and hopefully, he says, and this is a quote, no corrupt mail-in ballots. How much of that is actually possible inside of budget reconciliation?
Well, it's not really, at least within the Senate, where the parliamentarian has to rule whether something comports with very strict budget guidelines that allow this chamber to pass it without being at risk of a filibuster. So essentially pass it by a simple majority, by 51 votes. So the Save America Act, as it's written now, it would not likely comport with these budgetary rules because it is not budgetary in nature. nature. Now, the reconciliation 3.0, as we're calling it, it does have some grant programs in there for voter ID efforts. So that would presumably kind of make the cut for the rules, I would think. Of course, this is up to the parliamentarian. But the overall bill is a policy bill and not a budget bill. So, and it's unlikely that it would make it, and it certainly would not get 60 votes, which would be needed to overcome a filibuster.
All right. Bloomberg's Megan Scully, who leads our Capitol Influence team here in Washington. Thank you so much. And I'm pleased to say joining us now in our Washington, D.C. studios, Republican Congressman Mike Flood of Nebraska, who chairs the Republican Main Street Caucus. Congressman, welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. It's nice to see you in person.
Thank you very much. Megan was right on top of all her reports there. Well, I can leave now, right?
Yeah. Well, she outlined that you have a very busy week, as does the rest of your colleagues in the chamber. Are you going to get all of this done in 4 days?
It is a very big week, and it's a very important week because, as you note, we are back in our districts for recess. I have a town hall next week. We've got things planned. And so if we can pull this week off, it will be a major victory for House Republicans and our Speaker.
What's number one for you? Is it getting this reconciliation bill off the launch pad and finding a home for Save America?
Well, I think I have two shared number one priorities. Okay. One would be passing a continuing resolution tonight.
Okay.
The House of Representatives planning to fund the government before the election because a shutdown is not in America's interest. Mm-hmm. And then number two would be the reconciliation 3.0. My guess is it'll be hard to get that much further down the street on NDAA because there's a lot of other provisions that we're considering.
You get a CR tonight, though.
Yes.
That's entirely possible.
Yes. I mean, I'm hopeful we have the votes for it.
That would be a big story.
On reconciliation, obviously $95 billion in spending, no offsets for this. And you mentioned that you had a town hall earlier this month, and you'll have one coming up next week. At that town hall, you were asked by an attendee, why do you support Trump when he adds to the debt? This would add to the debt, right? Why not include pay-fors?
Well, first of all, most of this money is to replace our munitions. Mm-hmm. It's in our national security, given our military operations in Venezuela and the Middle East. And second, if we were to go the route of a regular supplemental with 60 votes in the Senate, we would be doing a deal with the Democrats somewhere north of $400 billion. I'm absolutely sure of it. And so this does what we have to do in that it replenishes our munitions. There's aid to agriculture, the SAVE Act, and then there's a couple other minor things. But ultimately, I think there's a debt ceiling discussion happening. But ultimately,
that again.
Yeah, welcome back. Ultimately, all of this comes together, and I think this is a lot less expensive than it would have been. And by the way, last year we cut $2 trillion out of federal spending for the first time in like decades.
Defense Secretary and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs will be on the Hill tomorrow testifying about the budget request for the Pentagon. It's not just the supplemental, if we're even still calling that anymore. But when you talk about the need to replace munitions, the President says we need $1.5 trillion, not only to fund operations, but to replace everything that has been fired, not just in this conflict, but in Ukraine, of course, in helping to protect Israel. There's a lot there. How difficult will it be for the Secretary and the Chairman to make that argument? And do you think that this number will land somewhere near $1.5 trillion when you put these bills together?
No,
okay.
No, I do not think
What's
that.
A realistic
I mean, I think
budget?
A realistic target for what we need military-wise, what we want and what we need are two different things, right?
Okay.
Would be like $350 billion. But, you know, the White House and the House leadership, they've decided to embark on this path with reconciliation. I think they've got $67 billion in there for the armed forces, $11 billion for agriculture. That is really the first step of many. And plus, after November, you know, we're going to find out what the next step is. There's even talk, and this is remote, of a reconciliation 4.0.
Yeah.
I don't know how possible that is given the financial year and everything, but there is a conversation about it.
I guess got to cross the first bridge you get to first. You mentioned the aid to farmers.
Right.
We've seen a few rounds of aid that has to go to the agricultural sector. Is that to you, Congressman, a failure of the president's tariff policies? Is that this is now required? You need to subsidize Americans?
Well, the reality was, you know, Mexico wasn't buying our white corn under Joe Biden. We were entering a kind of a dark era under the Joe Biden terms. So commodity prices aren't where they need to be. Certainly fertilizer is one of the inputs that's driving a lot of the stress in ag. So the $11 billion is helpful. I think ultimately, Jameson Greer getting more markets for our soybeans, our corns, our grain, all of that is in our interest. And I hope we're close to something more with China.
The analysis from Bloomberg Intelligence on that farm money is that a lot of it, if not all of it, will be used by farmers to pay off debt. For instance, you might not be buying John Deere right now because you have to manage your own finances. Does that mean that there'll need to be another turn here? There'll be another tranche of money for farmers down the road?
Well, I think it's maybe inaccurate to say just for debt. If you're 62 years old and you've got equity, you're in a much different spot than a 43-year-old farmer with a lot of debt. Mm-hmm. The 43-year-old farmer is managing operational debt, probably be going to go through a renewal cycle here in the next 3 or 4, maybe the next 6 months. All of that will come around, and hopefully we see, uptick in soybeans. We have been watching those prices very closely.
Yes, right.
Well, and you mentioned fertilizer prices. Of course, that has become perhaps more acute due to the closure of the Strait of Hormuz and difficulty getting vital ingredients to fertilizer out of the waterway. It's still an active conflict zone as we speak. And of course, we had 3 more American service members die over the weekend. How much more difficult does that make your job in talking to your constituents and trying to explain why it is that these individuals lost their lives, why we still find ourselves mired in the Middle East when the president initially said this would just be a matter of a few weeks?
Well, remember, we're talking about a regime that has vowed death to America. If I've said it once, I've said it 10 times. If they get their hands on a nuclear weapon, if they get their hands on a dirty bomb, they would not hesitate to use it on U.S. soil. They have proven that. They are martyrs, essentially. The people that stepped in after the leadership earlier this year was eliminated, a new round stepped in. So I think President Trump has to deal using force to people that have been using force on us. I still think the president's position and a great majority of us in Congress want to find a solution that's long-term. We've been close a couple of times. It's a very complex region, but I think that's the president's focus.
We spent some time reviewing your town hall of July 7, which is why Kailey mentioned one of the questions you were asked. You're not the only one, but you are part of a smaller, maybe shrinking circle of lawmakers that continues to hold town hall meetings, have face-to-face conversations, at times difficult ones, and we salute you for that.
Thank you.
I'm wondering if you plan to do more, and why isn't everyone acting like Mike Flood?
Well, I do 3 a year, and I'm going to have one coming up next week in Lincoln, which is the biggest city, probably the bluest city in my district.
Yeah.
Nothing gets better if we don't talk to each other, and you certainly understand that in the media. Listen, I've had town halls with 10 people show up because, there just isn't that emotion there. Now there's a lot of emotion in the air. There's a lot of opinions on both sides.
For sure.
I think it's good just to show up, and I hope more people do it in the future.
Well, it's an example for your colleagues, Congressman. It's great to see you. Mike Flood, Republican from Nebraska's 1st District. He chairs the Republican Main Street Caucus. That should give you a sense of the debate that we're walking into. What's going to be a doozy of a week on Capitol Hill, Kailey?
Yep, it's going to be a very busy couple of days. And, of course, we'll continue to keep you updated on the progress today on the late edition of Balance of Power at 5 p.m. right here on Bloomberg TV and Radio.